You stand in the shadowed corridors of the Topkapi Palace harem, the air thick with the mingled scents of jasmine incense and unwashed flesh, the metallic tang of blood lingering from the eunuchs' recent castrations, their high-pitched whimpers echoing off the marble walls as fresh slaves are dragged in, their eyes wide with terror at the grotesque figures guarding them. Mutilated men whose festering scars ooze beneath their silken robes, a shocking testament to the empire's insatiable demand for guardians who can never fully be men. This is no romantic sanctuary of silk and seduction, but a fortress of hidden horrors where young girls, ripped from their families in Circassia or the Balkans, are thrust into a world of forced submission, their bodies commodities in the Sultan's vast collection of concubines, with a promise of pleasure masked the reality of rape, rivalry, and ruthless elimination. The Ottoman imperial harem, far from the exotic fantasies peddled by Western Orientalists, concealed a labyrinth of sexual practices that twisted power, religion, and human anatomy into grotesque configurations, revelations that mainstream histories have long censored to preserve the facade of imperial grandeur. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, which spanned from the 14th to the early 20th century, the harem stood as a microcosm of absolute dominion, where sultans like Suleiman the Magnificent and his successors wielded unchecked authority over hundreds of women, their intimate lives dictating the fate of nations, yet riddled with dysfunctions that festered like untreated wounds. From the psychological deterioration of isolated concubines to the anatomical monstrosities inflicted upon eunuchs, all veiled behind the empire's majestic public image. The revelations begin with the brutal procurement of these women, often mere girls of 12 or 13, captured in raids on Christian villages in Georgia, Abkhazia, or Ukraine, or sold by impoverished parents enticed by tales of luxury, only to be transported in chains across seas and deserts, their virginity inspected like livestock at slave markets in Istanbul, where bidders prodded their flesh for firmness, assessing their potential for the Sultan's bed, a process so dehumanizing that contemporary observer Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who visited the harem in 1717, noted in her letters how these captives were bought and sold as publicly and infamously as in any of our markets, her words underscoring the stark commodification that stripped them of agency from the outset. Upon arrival, these slaves underwent a grotesque transformation, forcibly converted to Islam, stripped of their birth names, and given Turkish ones symbolizing beauty or submission, Roxolana becoming Haram, meaning the joyful one, then immersed in a regimen of training that blended refinement with erotic preparation, learning to dance seductively, recite poetry with sultry inflection, and master arts of pleasure drawn from ancient Persian texts, all while confined in dormitories reeking of sweat and despair, where the air hung heavy with the cries of those enduring their first violations, a systematic breaking of spirit that ensured compliance in the Sultan's chambers. Escalating the shock, the sexual hierarchy within the harem was a pyramid of privilege built on bodily exploitation, with the Sultan permitted up to 4 legal wives, or cadens, but an unlimited number of concubines, or odalisques, whose status hinged on their ability to arouse and impregnate, as seen in Sultan Murad III, who in the late 16th century amassed over 40 concubines, fathering more than 100 children, his relentless couplings leading to such exhaustion that court physicians prescribed aphrodisiacs laced with opium, fostering addictions that blurred the line between desire and delirium, while unwanted daughters were sometimes quietly disposed of to preserve the balance of heirs. More disturbingly, the principle of one concubine mother, one son, was intended to prevent fratricidal rivalries, yet was shattered by Haram Sultan in the 16th century, who bore Suleiman multiple sons through manipulative sorcery, as whispered in diplomatic correspondence. Her rise from slave to empress involving the elimination of rivals like Mahidevran, whose son Mustafa was strangled on Suleiman's orders. A private jealousy spilling into public execution that altered the empire's succession and revealed how intimate dysfunctions could topple dynasties. Delving deeper into the medical abnormalities, the harem's guardians were eunuchs, predominantly black Africans from Ethiopia or Sudan, subjected to horrifying castrations performed without anesthesia, where surgeons sliced away genitals with razor-sharp blades, cauterized the wounds with boiling oil, and buried the survivors in dung heaps to stem infection. A procedure so lethal that only 1 in 3 survived, as detailed in Ottoman medical records and echoed in the accounts of European travelers, like Jean-Claude Flachet in the 1750s, who described the resulting mutilated anachronisms with their high-pitched voices and swollen features, their psychological deterioration manifesting in cruel tyrannies over the women they guarded, including beatings for perceived insolence or suspected lesbian liaisons born of isolation. White eunuchs from the Balkans, castrated similarly, but often retaining partial functionality, oversaw the outer courts, yet their presence fueled rumors of illicit affairs, as in the case of chief white eunuch Gazanfer Aga in the late 16th century, whose incomplete emasculation allegedly allowed forbidden encounters, a taboo that threatened the harem's sanctity and led to purges where suspects were drowned in the Bosphorus, sacks weighted with stones to ensure a silent descent into the depths. The graphic details extend to punishments meted out for transgressions, where Sultan Ibrahim the Mad, in the 17th century, overcome by paranoia from venereal diseases contracted in his excesses, ordered the drowning of 280 concubines in the sea after suspecting infidelity, their bound bodies thrashing in the waves, as chronicled by Ottoman historian Naima, who described the scene with clinical detachment. The palace eunuchs cast them into the Bosphorus, where the currents carried away their screams, a massacre that exposed the fragile boundary between royal prerogative and psychopathic rage. Psychological analysis reveals how this isolation bred madness, with concubines like those under Ahmed III in the early 18th century resorting to opium-laced laudanum to numb the tedium, their minds fracturing into hallucinations amid the constant surveillance, while sultans like Selim III grappled with impotence from overindulgence, consulting alchemists for potions that only exacerbated their decline, a cycle of dysfunction that modern scholars attribute to inbreeding and unchecked power, drawing parallels to Freudian theories of repressed trauma manifesting in tyrannical behaviors. The political consequences of these private failures rippled outward as Velite sultans like Kozum, mother of Ibrahim, wielded influence through their son's weaknesses, lobbying for wars to favor their ethnic origins. Kozum, of Greek descent, pushing for Balkan campaigns, yet her meddling culminated in her strangulation by eunuchs in 1651, ordered by rival Turhan Sultan, the cord tightening around her neck as she gasped for air in her opulent chambers, an event recorded in Evliya Shalebi's travelogues as the Valide's throat crushed like a ripe fig, illustrating how harem intrigues could destabilize the empire's foreign policies and internal stability. Collateral damage extended to spouses and children, with princesses married off to aging viziers for alliances, enduring unions marred by abuse, as in the case of Fatma Sultan, daughter of Ahmed III, who suffered repeated divorces and humiliations, her letters pleading for release from this prison of unwanted embraces, while illegitimate offspring faced infanticide or exile, their tiny bodies discarded in palace gardens to prevent claims on the throne. Attempts at concealment grew desperate as conditions worsened, with sultans like Abdul Hamid I in the late 18th century employing Venetian ceruse, a lead-based cosmetic, to mask syphilitic sores acquired from infected concubines, the poison accelerating their deterioration, while rumors of pederasty circulated. Rooted in the Divsurm system where Christian boys were levied and sometimes groomed for the sultan's pleasure, a practice decried in European dispatches as boy love, fostering a culture of exploitation that scarred generations. As the empire decayed in the 19th century, these practices intensified, with Abdulmajid I fathering 43 children amid reports of postpartum hemorrhages claiming concubines' lives, their bodies hastily buried to avoid scandal. While eunuchs like the Kisler Aga amassed fortunes through bribes for access to the Sultan's bed, their corruption emblematic of a system rotting from within. The final collapse came with the empire's fall, yet revelations persisted through autopsies and memoirs, such as those of Abdul Hamid II's physician, who documented the Sultan's anatomical configurations deformed by excess, and preserved evidence like the skeletal remains of drowned concubines dredged from the Bosphorus, confirming long-suppressed horrors. Historical cover-ups sanitized these truths, with official chronicles omitting the graphic details, attributing deaths to natural causes, while Western Orientalists romanticized the harem in paintings of languid nudes, ignoring the putrid reality beneath. Returning to that shadowed corridor where you stood amid the scents of incense and blood. Now armed with the knowledge of these concealed atrocities, we see how the Ottoman harem's shocking sexual practices, rooted in slavery, mutilation, and unchecked lust, underscore timeless themes of power's corrupting force on humanity, echoing in modern scandals where the mighty hide their frailties behind facades of authority, leaving us with the haunting image of a eunuch's scarred visage, a perpetual reminder of the grotesque costs of empire.